Hi, everyone, and welcome to you. The name of this virtual presentation is Strategies for Success in Virtual Mathematics Instruction. A little bit about myself. My name is Dr. Jessica Hunt. I'm an Associate Professor of Mathematics Education and Special Education here in the College of Education at NC State. I'm also a Friday Institute Faculty Fellow. Before we get started today, I wanted to direct your attention to the Padlet parking lot. You can either scan the QR code or go directly to the short link that you see on the screen. On that site, you'll see that there are a couple different options for you to pose questions about the presentation that we'll be engaging in together today. These different parking lots for questions may not make a lot of sense right now. However, as we proceed in the presentation, I'm hoping that you'll feel welcome to post any questions that you have related to these areas. All right. So to get us started today, I wanted to talk a little bit about what it means to help students understand mathematics well. And to do that, I wanted to start with a quote. In 2009, Paul Lockhart wrote, "By concentrating on what and leaving out why, mathematics is reduced to an empty shell. If you deny learners the opportunity to pose their own questions, make their own conjectures and discoveries, to be wrong, to be creatively frustrated, to have an inspiration, and to cobble together their own explanations and proofs, you deny them mathematics itself." His statement is compelling because it connects to what it means to know mathematics well. As teachers, we can design instruction to not only work from students' reasoning, but also to advance it over time. That's the goal of this webinar, to give suggestions and strategies to support you to do that in a virtual space. So knowing mathematics well is connected to learning mathematics well. In 2001, the National Research Council described mathematics proficiency, and they did it through these 5 different strands: conceptual understanding, procedural fluency, strategic competence, adaptive reasoning, and productive disposition. In conversations with teachers around virtual learning, when time can be in shorter supply, they've shared with me the feeling that they feel pressure to focus more on the procedural fluency of mathematics because it's easier to recognize in a virtual environment. However, I want to impress upon you to look at these strands for their interconnectedness instead of thinking about having to pick just one. Students learn best when instruction builds using ideas they already have, is presented in a way that requires them to actively think through a problem, and prompts students to reflect on their thinking as well as the thinking of others. These 3 key learning mechanisms are connected to what I call 3 key teaching moves, and you see those on the screen. They are bringing forward prior knowledge, making sure students participate and use their thinking during math time, and support students to notice and reflect on their reasoning. Whether you're teaching in person or virtually, these learning mechanisms and connected teaching moves don't change. How some teaching moves are implemented might look a little bit different, but their principles remain unchanged. A simplistic example of this might be a lesson on dividing fractions. It may be easy to teach learners that all you need to do is keep change flip. You may even think that you would increase the engagement by introducing the lesson through a catchy song or a video. And all of these things are fine. However, learners also need time to grapple with the complexities of understanding that fraction division, just like whole number division, has both partitive and quotative structures. Students need experiences in engaging in both. They also need experiences in considering the differences between the two and also connecting them to everyday situations that they may encounter in life. Using wide tasks, that is, those that allow for several possible strategies, become really important because they support that beautiful interconnectedness of mathematics as described in those 5 strands of mathematical proficiency. The use of wide tasks, like you see on the screen, are just as applicable in the virtual setting. The trickier part of virtual environments is how do we digitally capture and respond to students' mathematical thinking? Well, fortunately, there are many tools available to support both teachers and students as they work within virtual environments. Later on, I'll highlight a few of them that I have found to be particularly effective for this purpose. Okay, let's go back to the chart that I shared a moment ago. In it, I suggest that there are key teaching moves: building from prior knowledge and experiences, promoting students' active participation, and promoting students to reflect on their thinking. And I also suggest that these teaching moves transcend virtual and in-person learning environments. So let's spend a little bit of time looking at each area one by one. Let's start with bringing forward prior knowledge. What are some ways that we could do this in the virtual setting? In-person classroom spaces, I've recommended using things like observation, conversation, and even interviews in order to uncover both the broad contextual knowledge and the specific mathematical knowledge that a student brings into class with them. Now, in a virtual environment, some of these suggestions could be problematic, such as conducting observations. However, teachers have also shared with us that some of them have gained a more unique perspective into their students' daily lives when teaching in a virtual environment. For instance, students' family members, including pets, may walk by or even pop into class. Getting to know students' home and community lives reveals their strengths and humanizes our instruction with them. Too often, students are told that who they are outside of the classroom is not valuable or relevant in school. I think we can use the virtual space as well to challenge that idea. Get to know your students and their experiences in ways that you can leverage inside the virtual classroom. One way that you can do this is to set aside a few minutes each day for students to, for example, share a story about themselves or their communities. For example, students may share a favorite snack they enjoy at home or other authentic stories from their homes and communities. Using questions like you see on the screen as conversation starters, even for a few minutes a day, can help bring students' lives and experiences into your virtual math instruction. Some teachers have shared that they've been surprised by the openness of some of their students in the virtual environment. And I think that may occur because the virtual environment can remove some of the social pressures of a classroom space or a space that students view as school. So in this way, students may actually feel more comfortable having conversations about their reasoning and themselves in a virtual setting, which sets you up as the teacher to ask questions, notice students' ways of reasoning and their ways of being, and help students to feel really valued and heard in the classroom. Here's a story from a teacher who worked through the barriers of communication while in the virtual environment. Take a moment and read it. If you need more time, please feel free to revisit this story later on. I can try to summarize. This teacher mentions using Flipgrid. In case you're not familiar with it, it's now called Flip, and it's an online recording platform. It's very easy to use, and it captures students' responses to a prompt within a designated time frame. Using this platform can allow students to record their thinking at a time that's convenient to them. As you continue to read, consider how this teacher adapted to the virtual environment by varying her modes of communications with her students. The second teaching move involves promoting students' participation in good tasks. How can we do that in a virtual space? Well, to start, I suggest that you devote class time so that students can co-construct some social norms that they can use in your virtual environment. Action really drives learning. So if students can't actively think through a math problem, then they may have difficulty moving forward, both in the context of the problem and in their mathematical reasoning more generally. However, for students to learn to use their own reasoning, they have to feel supported to do so. So actively engaging students in developing and refining the norms that they use within virtual instruction really sets the stage for their active role in their learning. In that way, norms are a really big deal. They're linked to things like students' disposition and autonomy within group settings. And they're often thought of as social correlates to students' evolving inner conceptions and even their beliefs. So, supporting students' dispositions and autonomy helps them to use their own knowledge in your virtual environment and help them advance that knowledge over time. One practical way to do this is to hold a virtual class activity around what it means to engage in a mathematical discussion, or what it means to share, explain, and justify mathematical thinking in the virtual setting. To do that, you might begin by leading a discussion with a goal of explaining or establishing why it's important to engage in mathematical discussion. To facilitate this discussion, you're going to want to create an anchor chart that can be prominently displayed and often referenced. I put one on the screen as an example. So on the left, you'll have words like look like, and on the right, the words sound like. Building from the discussion around the importance and purpose of mathematical discourse and engagement, ask the students, what does it look like to hold a discussion in mathematics? What does it sound like? As learners generate ideas, you'll want to document those. You may want to use a tool such as Google Slides or a Google Doc, where students are able to collaborate on the creation of this anchor chart that can be referenced and revised on a regular basis. Once you have a good number of ideas recorded, ask students which ideas seem similar and which are distinct. This step will ensure that students make connections between similar ideas and will also shorten the list of ideas to a core set of shared values of the group. You can work together with your students to refine these connected ideas into normative statements like you see on the screen. The final list then is the chart that you see, and it's just one example. Remember to check in with students regarding this final list. Ensure that your students feel heard and that the list represents the original ideas generated by the group. An added benefit of creating this in a digital setting and with digital platforms is that students can find images to add to the norms chart that illustrate what it means for them to engage in mathematics and also change it as needed moving forward. After the social norms have been co-constructed, it may also be beneficial to develop sentence starters or frames based on those norms for students to reference during instruction. If teachers engage students in this simple yet powerful process, then students are positioned as active members of the virtual environment from the start. The final teaching move involves promoting noticing, reflecting, and connections. Here, I'm going to share a common teaching format that you can leverage virtually to engage students in math tasks, and that's the Think Pair Share. Within it, teachers can prompt, position, and facilitate students to share their reasoning. Implementing this structure in the virtual environment really has some amazing benefits, especially if you pair it with an online platform where you can notice the students' work in real time, such as Jamboards or Desmos. So let's unpack each part, assuming that we use a tool like Desmos to help us. All right, let's start with think time. In a virtual environment, a potential benefit is that some of the initial think time can be available to learners asynchronously, meaning outside of live instruction. One way to accomplish that is to provide a task with the expectation that students will work on it outside of class time. For instance, you might assign the task, two students share 5 tacos equally. How much tacos does each person get? And you might pose this through a virtual platform like Desmos, a Jamboard, or even with a flip video. In this example, we're going to use Desmos. Desmos has drawing tools that allows for students to annotate their own thinking. Another benefit of having the think time completed asynchronously is that it provides more time for you to think about the intentional sharing of student work during the pair and lesson, during the pair part of the lesson structure and also in the share. However, providing tasks in an asynchronous space may mean that you miss out on monitoring student thinking as they work through the problem. So you'll need to weigh the benefits of students having that additional think time outside of class against the lost opportunity that you may have to monitor their thinking in real time. Then determine, based on your student's need and the expected outcome of the lesson, which one's more beneficial to you. Sometimes you might offer them time to think outside of class, where other times you may want to monitor their initial thinking during a synchronous session. Whichever one you decide, keep in mind that because the pair and share parts are collaborative and will likely need to happen in real time, you'll have the opportunity to monitor any adjustments in thinking during those parts. In a virtual setting, the use of the breakout rooms is probably the most effective way to implement the pair portion of the lesson because it allows for that in the moment dialogue that we value so much. However, we found that there must be intentionality with how breakout rooms are introduced and the expectations around them. Check out the figure on the screen. Within it, there's 3 factors that you can consider as you support students to work in that pair structure within a breakout room: the size of the group, the time in the breakout room, and the tasks used. During the first few experiences in breakout rooms with a new group of students, you may want to keep this group size at 2 people. The reason for that is it allows for the students to feel more comfortable and increases the likelihood that they will engage with the other person. If possible, you may want to consider pairing the students with someone you know they'll talk to, like a friend that they have in the class. You'll also want to keep the amount of time initially very short, 2 or 3 minutes at best, so that students know they have a limited amount of time and need to stay on task. The initial tasks may be more of a technical nature, such as building their comfort with the platform, like sharing the screen or using an annotation tool. Or it might be engaging with a low risk question, such as, would you rather use a kangaroo or a hippopotamus as a mode of transportation? As students' comfort levels start to increase, you can then increase the amount of time in the breakout room. You can also increase the number of people in the breakout room, and you can start transitioning into those good mathematical tasks. While I feel that the use of the breakout room is probably the most effective way to implement the pair portion of the lesson in virtual settings, I also understand that that may not be an option for everyone. So if that's not feasible, then students may need to communicate through written form or through the use of auditory or video recording, such as a flip video, to be shared with their partner as a means of dialogue asynchronously. However, because it's not real time, this could hinder the communication and comprehension between the students, but it's definitely an option to use. During the share time, a teacher needs to figure out a way to have learners share their work so that all students in the class are able to view it and talk about it. In class, This is usually done on a piece of paper or a dry erase board or even a board or a projector that's in that in-person space. However, in a virtual environment, all students are on the computer. So with that being the case, using platforms like Desmos or Jamboard or others allows all of the students and the teacher the opportunity to view the students' work clearly because it's projected right to their screen. Another benefit of these types of platforms is that the teacher can more easily show the students' work during the share portion of the lesson. So on the screen, you see an example of students' work when presented with that task that we talked about earlier. Two students share 5 tacos equally. And that's done through the Desmos platform in this example. So here, the teacher was able to monitor the students as they worked through the think portion. Then, based on what the teacher saw in their work, as well as short conversations they had with each other in order to better understand their thinking, the teacher then paired up students A and C and students B and D to discuss their reasoning. While these students were in the breakout room, the teacher visited each of them in the breakout rooms. To finish up, the teacher then used the snapshot feature within Desmos to share multiple students' work out for the whole group for discussion. As we reflect about the Think, Pair, Share framework in the virtual space, let's revisit the idea of norms within the think, the pair, and the share portions. Take a look at the table on the screen. How do the norms fit in with think, pair, shares and the virtual space? Will you have the same social norms if your students are working synchronously as you would if they were working asynchronously? Revisit the questions with a virtual space in mind. In summary, virtual environments can open new doors that allow for engagement and collection of learner thinking in ways that may have been left untapped previously. So as we move forward, let's optimize learning in our virtual spaces. I'd like to thank you for your time today and remind you that we have a Padlet parking lot, which you can view and pose questions of your own that I'm happy to answer at any time. I'm also available at jhunt5@ncsu.edu for any questions or comments that you might have about this session.